Well, good morning and welcome again to Elevenses. It's actually Elevenses 224 because it is Sunday the 20th, not Wednesday the 16th. I've managed to put the wrong date on the show, but hey ho, never mind. It's only one show out. What have we got for you in today's show? Well, more. That is the wrong set of notes as well. Let me just try and get this sorted out. I get this already weeks in advance, well, not weeks in advance, but some minutes in advance, and somehow or other I've still managed to get the wrong set of crib notes for the show. But basically, the EU have now sanctioned that all major bike and part shipments to Russia should cease immediately. So we will take a look at that story. I can see what's happened. Let me just get the correct bit of program running. The PC is rebooted overnight. I can tell that's what's happened. It'll be an update, no doubt, to the computer. Right, so yes, North Wales Police are back with their annual ride safe warning to bikers. The Indonesian Ministry of Energy has successfully converted 100 internal combustion engine motorcycles to electric power in what is described as a pilot scheme. So that's quite interesting. The new Royal Enfield Scram, which I talked about last time out, is now listed. It has a price of 4,599 according to one website. We'll be taking a quick look at something called a mousse as well. It's a puncture-proof sort of inner tube for tires that are tubeless, and we'll have I'll explain how that works. The KTM 790 Duke is back on sale. The CG125 has never been off sale for nearly 50 years. So a quick look at that too. A 3-cylinder radial engine is going in a speed record bike. Be interesting to see how that performs. And then finally, today's discussion point: can you learn to ride in 3 minutes? Because BikeSocial say you can. Right, okay. Let's crack on with the show. It all looks like a bit of a mess at the moment here on my computer, having tried to get everything ready in advance. So let me try and get that up one more time. Right, okay, at least that's up right. That is correct. I'm now seeing the yes, I'm now seeing the right stories on my laptop, so that's good news. I've still got the wrong pictures though. Right, okay, so basically the response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues. On Tuesday last week, a bit too late to include on my Wednesday show, it hadn't turned up in the news stream. The European Union officially placed a ban on the exports of motorcycles and accessories and spare parts to Russia with values of over 5,000 euros. So obviously, that still leaves plenty of leeway for smaller pieces to be exported. The sanction went into effect immediately as soon as it was released. As mentioned on Wednesday, individual companies, including Harley Davidson, Honda, Yamaha, Polaris, and BMW, had already halted exports to Russia. And Bridgestone, who, as you are surely aware, are a major tyre manufacturer, not just for motorcycles, but also, of course, for other four-wheel vehicles, they've halted export and production in Russia as well. Morning to everybody. We've got a couple of people looking in. Sue has said good morning. She says, I appear to be frozen. I hope I have now unfrozen, Sue. I'm not seeing any indications of problems at my end. And Nigel has also looked in. Don't forget, you're watching Elevenses, and this show will go out every Wednesday and Sunday at 11. Now, the second story of the day, which again came out last week, just a little bit too late for my Wednesday show. So a little bit late if you're already out riding and enjoying the fine weather, but the first of the annual police warnings to bikers and drivers to take extra care appeared during the week. And this one particularly came from the North Wales Police, and obviously North Wales is a popular biking spot. So the local force have warned riders to check their bikes over carefully, because they say many of us are getting the machines out of storage for the first time as the weather gets warmer. Sergeant Lee Evans of the Roads Policing Unit said motorcycles may not be roadworthy after being locked up over winter, even if they were in good condition on the day they went into storage. Tyres can deflate over time and parts can seize, so it's very important that riders check their vehicles carefully before riding them. It's far better to fix an issue before setting off on a journey than discover a problem whilst out riding and potentially being involved in the collision. Well, I wouldn't disagree with that, but what I would say, of course, is that it's far better to actually set a day aside for checking the bike over, probably a week, in fact, before you actually want to ride it, rather than trying to do it on the morning before you set off. Tyres, yes, you can pump tyres up, that's easy enough, but binding brakes are another matter altogether, because you'll be able to ride off on a binding brake, but it will overheat. It could lock on as the brake gets hotter and hotter. It'll certainly wear your pads out in a double quick time, and if the disc gets hot enough, it will warp. So just a few moments checking the bike over before you ride is definitely a good idea. And I have covered that last year, actually. I might dig out those articles and sort of reframe them and repurpose them for this year. Sergeant Evans also mentioned that overconfidence can come from having ridden all winter. And he said there's a new and exciting feeling when you get back on your bike after winter. And there is indeed. And the first sunny days can actually be a bit of an excuse to add a bit more speed, a bit more lean angle, and a bit less caution to our ride to maximize that feeling. Since we've been riding, on eggshells for the last 3 or 4 months. But the fact the roads are dry and doesn't take away the risks posed by the standard crash hotspots, which, of course, as we all know, I'm sure, junctions, corners, and overtakes. Sergeant Evans added, if you're planning on going out, please travel at an appropriate speed for the road. And for riders who've had a layoff, Sergeant Evans had a question. Can you honestly say that your skills are as polished as when you rode last several months ago? And the fact is, our skills do drop off from lack of use. It's true in any field. And whilst it is just like getting back on a bicycle, you soon do remember how. There is a period when our reactions aren't as sharp as they were at the end of the previous riding season. Even after all these years, one of the things I do first when I get out on a bike is I do some hard stops, just to remind myself of how the bike feels when I'm braking hard. And some steering exercises are also a good one to work in. They all rebuild the physical connection between bike and rider, and they up the confidence of our level of control. But don't neglect the mental side of things either. Whilst keeping the speed down, it's also a good idea to do some simple observation exercises. As you probably know, one of my favorites is looking for road signs, because they are probably the simplest and most fruitful way to find out where other people have got it wrong, which is a good warning that we should be a bit more cautious there. So even experienced riders could do the refresher, and Sergeant Evans once again urges bikers to consider further training, and of course he mentions BikeSafe. North Wales Police also remind riders that the forecast is unpredictable at this time of year, so do check before riding. I'd say it's good advice, frankly, to anyone. The reminders apply to riders in all areas, of course, and I'm happy to run courses here in the southeast for anybody who's local. I've got easy start points from Kent, Surrey, Middlesex, Buckinghamshire. Middlesex doesn't exist anymore. Bucks, Herts, and Essex. And I'm also able to get out to Oxford area without too much difficulty. So one of the courses I am running at the moment is a riding refresher, which is basically what it says on the tin. You tell me what kind of riding you do, I set a route up and we go and do it. And just in case you're thinking this is the usual police knocking bikers tactic, drivers are also being urged to think bike and give riders sufficient room when following, and to be particularly cautious at junctions. So I've got a bit of everything there, advice for everybody. And don't forget, this show goes out Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. And if you miss an episode, you can catch up over on the YouTube channel, which is Survival Schools UK. Don't forget that all important UK at the end. Right, okay. Paul, Kevin Paul has looked in. He's at Rikers. Well, enjoy the brekkie from there. Chilly ride. Yes, it's a little bit chilly out there. Forecast is looking good for the rest of the week, though. So enjoy your breakfast there. Sue says good advice for the start of the season, and that she unfroze. Excellent. Yes, it's always good to know. Right, okay, so on to Indonesia and a story which caught my eye. The Energy and Mineral Resources Ministry has successfully converted 100 conventional motorcycles to electric power, and this is the idea is to establish the electric power as a thing basically in Indonesia. The finished bikes were actually showcased on Thursday. I don't have any pictures of them, unfortunately. It was at the end of a 6-month pilot program. Now, again, there are no details on the conversion itself, but Energy and Mineral Resources Minister Arifin Tasrif, he said that in implementing the conversion program, we used components which are easily found in the market. So I suspect they went on to the Chinese equivalent of eBay and found things out there. The project will continue. They will convert 1,000 electric bicycles. Oh God, I'm getting warnings now. My mouse battery is flat. It's all going wrong this morning. 1,000 motorcycles to electric bikes this year. The converted bikes have all been endurance tested, and they've done a total of 10,000 kilometers in mixed riding conditions. Specifically, they mentioned dry and wet weather, which is, I suppose, if you're sitting on an electric battery, be fairly useful to know that it's not going to short circuit when it rains. But they do have a way to go to shift the entire fleet of motorcycles to electric, because currently Indonesia has around 115 to 120 million motorcycle units. 6 million units being added every year. To put that into perspective, there are something of the order of 1.3 million motorcycles in regular use here in the UK. So, okay, now in the last show, I also covered the launch of the brand new Royal Enfield Scram, which is essentially a stripped down version of the 411 Himalayan. Now, I didn't have a price for the bike, but suggest it might be around £300 less. Apparently, I was a bit overconfident in the price point there, because overlandevent.com, they have given the price of the new Scram at 4,599. Now, rather surprisingly, that's just £100 less than the 2020 Himalayan base model. Now, since the Scram has actually lost some fairly handy bits, the fly screen, you may or may not want one of those, but it has lost the useful rear rack, and also apparently something I wasn't aware of, it's also lost the center stand. Now, I would say that as you would need to add those accessories back on to turn the bike into a practical machine, certainly the rack and the center stand, I'd say that makes the bike around £200 overpriced. So I would say that my price was about right, and the Royal Enfield are being a little bit optimistic on how much they can sell the bike for. Right, okay, anything else I wanted to say? Yep, I usually put this at the beginning, but I forgot to. If you've got any comments, any questions, any feedback, anything you'd like to ask me at all, something for a future show, do drop me a line. I will try to answer during the show if I possibly can. If I can't do it during the show, I will do it when I get to the end of it. Graham says he's just in from a windy dog walk, and he's looking forward to getting out on his Aprilia later in the sun. Good idea, Graham. Excellent choice, I think. Right, now, onto a new product which I found in my feed just the other day. Um, Now, I still enjoy riding my classic CB 250 RS Honda with its single cylinder air cooled engine. So there's a side to me that is drawn actually to low tech machines like Royal Enfields, but there's always one thing that puts me off these bikes, and it is tubed tyres. Now, I've made no secret of the fact that, in my opinion, tubed tyres are long past their sell-by date for road use. I really don't think there's any excuse for a modern road machine not to have tubeless tyres. Now, yes, tubeless tyres do get punctures. Yes, tubes can be replaced at the roadside if you've got the right tools and if you know how to do it. So you can replace them in the middle of the desert, which of course is the argument in favour of tubes for off-road riders. But wherever you are, when you get a flat, you have to be able to bring the bike to a safe stop first. Now, having survived several high speed blowouts on tubed tyres, one notably in the outside lane of the M25, one in Maidstone, which sent me straight through a line of oncoming traffic. I was extremely lucky that when I ran off the road on the left hand bend, I actually ran straight into a lay-by and stopped in it facing the wrong way. And another which took me off the road on a right hand bend, but fortunately it was onto a large grassy lawn outside a stately home. So the crash was a soft one. So I know I've been lucky with some of those blowouts. I've had other flat tires which have resulted in rather less spectacular losses of control, but any of those could have basically had some really nasty consequences. Now, contrast that with the majority of the punctures in my tubeless tyres. Um, Even when I picked up a nail in the front tyre on the motorway on my FZ 750 and the tyre went flat within about, I would say, less than a minute, I've been able to decelerate gradually enough to pull over to somewhere safe till I could put a tubeless uh, repair in the tyre. Um, Even when I ran over a bottle, that was just outside the old Wimbledon Speedway Stadium. Somebody tossed it into the road just as I was passing, and I ran straight over it. And basically the rear tubeless tire was my first bike with tubeless tires. It got a gash in it, which was about an inch long. So that went flat almost immediately. But the thing I discovered, of course, is that the tubeless tyres don't roll off the rim. So although it went flat and the steering got difficult, I didn't lose control. And in fact, I was actually able to deliver the parcel, which had to go just down the road, ride the bike back to northwest London where I lived at the time, and then ride the bike to a tyre fitters to get a replacement tyre, all on a completely flat and written off rear tyre. Yes, it was even more written off by the time I got to the tyre fitters, but I was able to ride that bike in a controllable fashion. And of course, some tubeless punctures, I would suggest, are never even detected by the rider. They just put a little bit of air in every couple of weeks and they keep it topped up. So, to be honest, in what we talk about as being a safety conscious environment these days, where motorcycles are significantly overrepresented in bike crashes, I do struggle to see how it is that road bikes can still be sold with this outdated technology. So, both my work bikes have cast wheels and tubeless, of course, but the 250 does have spokes and tubes. And yes, I've managed to fall off that bike when I got a blowout at walking pace. I was actually just turning into a side road, and I literally fell off literally just dropped over sideways onto my knee as the tyre rolled off the rim. Now, what was quite annoying was I actually had a dispenser of the tyre slime, sort of gloop that you put into these tubes, which I'd never actually taken off the shelf. The idea is that the sealant has fibers in it. The fibers get squished out into the leak and promptly block it again. Now, we used to use these on 125 training bikes at the old training school, and they did work as build. Yes, the tyre still went down, but we found that they deflated slowly. In nearly every case, the trainee actually got the bike back to the training centre, completely unaware that there was a puncture. It was only next morning we tended to discover them when we wheeled the bike out and discovered the tyre was flat, which was inconvenient, but it was safer than tackling a trainee having an unexpected topple. So The downside of these slime treatments, which do work, generally speaking, is they're messy and they don't actually take well to bike sitting still for prolonged periods, which is, of course, what my little 250 tends to do. So, a few years ago, I was making some inquiries about products called tyre mousses. Now, these are popular solutions punctures for off road riders. Now, the mousse isn't, as I thought originally, some kind of foam that you actually pump into the tire. It's actually essentially a tube of flexible foam, um, which simulates the pressure of the tire. Now, it's designed to maintain functionality even when that tire gets a puncture. So you place it inside the tire before you fit the tire on the rim. And the original run flat mousse was called the bib mousse, and it was developed in 1984 by Michelin for use in enduro, rally raid, and motocross events. Um, so even if that particular bib mousse is punctured, it doesn't actually contain any air, so it doesn't actually matter, doesn't make any difference. Now, there are downsides to mousse tubes. The first one is they're much heavier and less compliant than a standard air-filled tube. That affects the handling. They also run hot, apparently. They shrink as they age, as they go through heat cycling, and they need replacing regularly. They can even melt if the tyre gets too hot, and they are expensive, almost as expensive as a tyre itself. But now, an Italian company called Orisa Mousse um, has introduced what they're calling the B-Shore, which is a mousse which is designed for street as well as off-road use. Now, let me just see if I can get the picture up. Hopefully I can in just a second or two. Yeah. This is something else that went wrong this morning. Share. I'll get there in the end. Give me a moment. Here we go. We should have that coming up on screen any moment now. There it is. That is the picture of the Risa Moose. Now, it's, as I said, it's supposed to be designed for street as well as off-road use. It's so new that it's currently in a patent pending phase, and the website doesn't even have an explanation of how it works in English at the moment. Um, it's basically said to use a new memory expanded plastic polymer, a foam which is claimed to be able to withstand heat cycles, unlike the ordinary mousses. And that would make it, they say, suitable for street bike tyres. Now, once punctured, the mousse allows the rider to retain control and carry on riding at a reduced pace to a place where the tyre can be fixed rather than having to stop at the roadside. Now, how do you know that you've got a flat? Well, there's your answer. There is a sensor built in to the an LED monitor there into the tire, basically, which is then monitored by that LED box, which can be fitted somewhere where the rider can see it up front. So a sudden drop in pressure sends the warning to the rider. The system only activates when the bike is being ridden, and the integrated battery, which is actually inside the mousse, is said to last around 3 years. Okay, so the what do we know about these? Well, it seems that at the moment the Roosa Moose intend to release 5 different types. There's a one they call the Urban, which is for small scooters and commuters, an Adventure, which is for the on and off-road adventure tourers, a Chopper for custom heavyweight machines, Tourer for sport touring and touring bikes, and Sporty for performance-oriented naked and sports bikes. But they do note that it's not intended for use on a racetrack. The other downside is that they won't be cheap. The adventure model, for example, is set to retail for between 150 and 180 euros. The one other thing to mention before you consider dashing out and trying to fit them to your road bike as the latest hot thing, one other proviso. Andrew Dalton of White Dalton Solicitors, writing on his biking law blog, said that he was of the view that mousses, whilst useful, did not meet the construction and use tests and therefore are technically legal. Now, I thought immediately that Reese and Moose would then have to get their product independently tested and certificated before they were able to sell it for road use. And in fact, when I translated the Italian page to English, it actually revealed that they are planning a series of tests with a TUV SUD, to demonstrate the system to an external certification body. So that's good. Right, okay, so who else has looked in? Nigel says, yeah, crosswinds, yes, on the M25. Yeah, it was pretty gusty here, actually. Right, okay, £40 E40 Flanders. What's that all about then? Yeah, sounds interesting. Right, so now last weekend I was talking about the retreads of existing ICE bikes being pretty much all we had to look forward to, but I wasn't expecting Honda to be resurrecting what is essentially a 50-year-old model. But it turns out when you look that, in fact, this little bike hasn't actually been out of production during its near 50-year life. It's a CG125. You probably recognize it if you learned to ride during the 80s and 90s. It's a pretty good bet you actually learned on one of them. It's the bike that many training schools had as a mainstay of their fleet during the old Part 1, Part 2 test days, even through the current CBT era, right into the 2000s. It was in production from 76 to 2008 in Japan, but in 85, the bikes for the European market started coming from Brazil. Now, I remember there was a noticeable drop in quality of those particular bikes from Brazil over the Japanese models. And when I worked at CSM in South London, we had some of those bikes, and to be honest, they weren't particularly well made. The chrome and paint were pretty poor, but the biggest issue, aside from the fairly awful drum brake on the front, was 6-volt electrics. The headlight was a genuine glowworm, which made night riding particularly iffy. And I actually got stopped by an examiner who asked why my learners were riding around mostly headlights off, and the answer was simple. Riding around town with the headlight on meant that the indicators wouldn't flash. So it was a choice of one or the other. Which would he prefer? I asked, and he took the point. So that is the CG, which is still around. The bike got a restyle. It got improved in 1992. It got a long overdue switch to 12-volt electrics. You could actually see where you were going with the halogen, and the indicators also worked. And the horn sounded as well. That was another thing that used to go missing if the battery was flat on the 6-volt one. The bike also got a small but effective front disc at much the same time, and I believe the production shifted to Turkey. We ordered, I think it was 26 of those bikes when I was working at Sync Ports at Lid in the summer of '97, I think it was. Basically, we had to run them in, the instructors. I had to do 3, I think, and running in essentially involved riding them pretty much flat out home from school and back to work again in the morning, because otherwise it would have taken me twice as long as normal. A 50-minute journey anyway. That model stayed in the catalogue till 2009 when Euro 3 emission regs killed it off, and we got the CBF 125 instead. But it wasn't the end of the CG. In Pakistan, the original CG is still being produced by Atlas Honda Limited. The Brazilian plant has actually redesigned the pushrod engine with an overhead camshaft to meet emission regulations. The CG was also previously manufactured in South Korea and Thailand, but of course, the place that you're most likely to come across it is China, where there are not only legally licensed variants, but of course, numerous illegal copies. They've been widely available since the late 80s, and amazingly, some of these illegal clones have been exported due to high demand in Africa and the Middle East. So the picture that you're actually seeing there, that's the very latest CG125 Special, manufactured in China by Wuyang Honda. So it is an official model. It very much closely resembles the Pakistani one, actually, sold by Atlas Honda. And the styling is pretty unchanged from the early models. 9.9 horsepower is all you get. 9.5 Newton meters of torque, so you will get to about 60 flat out if you fold the mirrors down and get on the top of the tank. But the good news is that if you put a litre of fuel in these bikes, it will take you over 50 kilometers, which is 30 odd miles, so you should get about 135 mpg out of them. That's much what I remember the training bikes doing, and that means they will do about 250, 300 miles to a tank, or something like that. Ridiculous range, and they're under £900 in China. Right, what have we got here? We've got a couple of comments. Nigel says, interesting about tubed tyres rolling off the rim. I thought most tyres nowadays were all tubeless. Do they still suffer from rolling off the rim? It depends largely on the rim, whether there is a bead retainer, but some of the smaller bikes don't have any such thing. And a lot of smaller bikes do still have tubeless tubed tyres, sorry. Tubeless, obviously, standard fitment for road bikes in anything sort of 250cc up, generally speaking. But a lot of bikes with off-road pretensions still use tubed tyres. Some use spoke systems which allow them to fit tubeless tyres, but a lot don't. It's something I constantly pick up on wire-wheeled models, some of which cost a lot of money. It may be all very well to, as I say, if you're a serious off-roader, then fine, go for tubes if you want them. But if you're going to be using the bike on the road, I don't want tubes, frankly. It was always the one thing that put me off a Transalp. I loved the Transalp as a bike to ride, but I couldn't get the tyres that I wanted for it. E40 Flanders Road. Oh yes, okay. The old biker's loft. Yes, okay. Yes, I've been along that one, and yes, my general strategy for dealing with that road is actually go about 20 miles inland and go cross country, because of the wind. Right, okay. I'm actually running massively over time today, so I'm going to leave out the next story, or next two stories. Otherwise, I'll never get to the end of it. I didn't realise I had quite so much prepared. So I'll jump on to today's discussion point. How long does it take to teach someone to ride? Well, the thing is, if you actually looked at a Bennett's social video, let's see if I can find the picture. There it is. It's up on YouTube and it says how to ride in 3 minutes. Now, that's pretty clearly nonsense, but to be fair to Bennett's, the video is fairly light-hearted, but it is clickbait. And inevitably, some people will be influenced by something that says you can learn to ride in just 3 minutes. Now, it's already difficult enough, I recall all too well, not just from my CBT days, but even now from interacting with new riders who want to learn to ride and who are asking for advice. It's difficult enough to persuade CBT trainees that they will actually need to spend more than just a few minutes learning to ride. There are far too many sort of I jumped on the bike in the field and was riding in 5 minutes kind of stories around, which make it seem like it's straightforward. But that person, frankly, in the field probably fell off a dozen times before they managed to keep it upright for 10 meters. And the road is a very much less friendly place to ride than a field. So basically, the internet is full of actual stories, like this one, which I found online. I'd never ridden a motorcycle before, so I had another friend teach me to ride during a few minutes one afternoon. We then went to the California Department of Motor Vehicles the next day, and I took and passed both the written and riding tests in the parking lot and was officially a licensed motorcycle rider. Now, to be fair to that rider, he did go on to say that it wasn't adequate preparation, and when he next rode, it was in England, and he promptly crashed. But you know, the realistic advice is what this training school says. Everyone's different and it has aptitudes in diverse areas. There's no single answer to how long it will take to learn to ride a motorcycle. That said, most people are usually able to learn the basics of riding a motorcycle in a day. But what do we mean by the basics? Now, the technical sort of tasks, the actual mechanical movements of the controls, which actually make a machine move from A to B and getting it stopped again, don't usually take too long. Now, when I worked down at Lid, we used to offer a pre-CBT training session, hour long. The DVSA hated it but couldn't legally stop us as we didn't go out on the road. And it was usually long enough to get the basics of stopping, starting, and it's important to get those two in the right order, by the way, think about it, and turning sorted out. But most of the other places that I worked subsequently threw novices straight into a CBT. And some struggled because of the pace that CBT is supposed to go, and some never made it out onto the road ride on the same day that they started. Now, something else you'll hear said regularly is get some experience riding a cycle. Now, I've said it myself because I do think it does help. Um, if you can get used to the sensation of moving and balancing on two wheels, which is very different from anything else you're likely to have experienced, it is very much to the point. But I've also found that too much cycling experience can be negative. Learning to trust the front brake being one case in point. Now, most cyclists are rightly relatively wary of the front brake because I've been over the handlebars on a bicycle myself. But persuading these people that the extra weight of the motorcycle does actually make the front brake the straight line stopper is sometimes a bit tricky. And getting riders to use the rear brake correctly isn't always easy either. Some ignore it despite constant reminders, others overdo it. Skids are fairly common in training. Um, but one story I do remember particularly, I had a woman who kept locking the rear wheel and producing some really spectacular tire smoking skids. Now, I tried all sorts of things to explain that she was overdoing it with the back brake, but it wasn't until I got another instructor to take over the actual e-stop exercise and I watched what she was doing side on rather than from in front where you're standing there sticking your hand up and telling them to put the brakes on, that I actually saw what she was doing. She was using the rear brake like a car brake. So she was actually lifting her entire foot off the foot peg, and so that the brake pedal was actually under the instep of her admittedly tiny boot. So rather than just rocking her foot down so it was her toes actuating the brake lever, she was actually using the full power of her leg to apply the rear brake. So no wonder it locked up, and no wonder I couldn't adjust it to stop her locking it up. The other thing about bicycles is they don't come with a clutch either. Now, that may be no great drawback if you're learning on auto, where the rear brake is usually up on the bars, of course, where the rear brake of a cycle would be, but it does make life difficult for experienced cyclists sometimes to actually not pull the um, clutch in, thinking it's the rear brake. Um, and in any case, finessing the clutch is probably the most difficult thing we need to learn on a motorcycle. And it's particularly difficult, of course, when the bars are turned through any angle, because the ergonomics get particularly difficult as our arms change position. So on a smaller 125, the throttle controls relatively straightforward. You kind of open it to go and close it to slow down again. But the mix of too much throttle and not enough clutch does make wheelies on a 125 surprisingly easy. But having said all that, with a trainee with pretty much average aptitude, a morning working on the car park skills on CBT is generally enough to get them up to the standard where I feel I can take them out on a road ride. But what that doesn't mean is that those riders have any aptitude for riding in traffic. Now, again, we used to get these riders turn up who blasted round the field for several years on a field bike of some sort. Some even had gears skills, but they often went to pieces on the road because they were used to hacking along at high speed and bouncing over sort of bumpy ruts and cow dung and that kind of thing. But they had no idea about actually dealing with traffic. And a lot of them found it really, really scary, not surprisingly. So The trouble is that most of those would not actually complete the road ride to anything like a successful standard. And I'll come on to what the standard I was looking for and it was in a moment. But that used to cause knock-on effects because people have this idea that CBT is a day's training, and when they get to the end of it, they get their CBT certificate. They are although we tell them before the course starts that the course takes as long as it takes, and that not to expect to pass in a day, that's what they expect. And of course, they get very upset when they don't pass in a day. There are stories, of course, of dads coming around with baseball bats to sort out the instructor. And I'm not exaggerating, things like that do happen. So what standard was I looking for at the end of the road ride? Now, that's a pretty good question, actually, because the DVSA don't tell us. There are lots of references to the standard that the rider needs to get to, but nobody ever tells you what it is. So I figured that out fairly early on and actually asked my own instructor when I was on the instructor training course. Um, what what that standard was, and he came up with a fairly pithy explanation of how he saw it. And he said, when you're confident they can ride out of the gate of the training school on their own bike and not kill themselves before they get home. So that was the CBT standard, and that's what I applied myself. Now, frankly, that's not set very much of a bar to clear, has it? And that makes it all the more worrying that so many new riders now see CBT as evidence that they can ride to a decent standard. Many riders, thanks to the test, the tiered test, if anything, um, they will take CBT, they will stick their old plates on their bike and go riding with their CBT certificate in hand, and they think they're riding at a decent standard, but at the same time they're picking up experience ready for the bike test. Now, I even found a training school website which said almost exactly that. Now, in my opinion, CBT is not adequate preparation for the road. You might stop you killing yourself on your first ride home, but it certainly doesn't prepare you for anything like the amount of riding situations you're likely to come across. The bike test, with all its faults, particularly the lack of work on twisty roads, is actually a more reasonable test, certainly for urban riding. And it even gets you out onto faster dual carriageways. So, although it may not take you on the motorways, it does at least get riders competent and reasonably confident at riding on fast roads. So, the standard that the bike test is actually looking for is that of a reasonably competent rider. And basically, what that means is someone who doesn't put themselves or anyone else at risk and can obviously obey road traffic rules. So, that really does indicate that CBT falls way short, in my opinion. Well, how short? Well, if someone has prior experience of using the roads in a car, generally speaking, after a CBT, it'll take them a day or so to master the bike to CBT standard. But generally, I found that one more day's full training on road, and then a test, maybe next afternoon, would be enough to get the vast majority of those people through the bike test with a good test pass. And by that, I mean less than 5 minors. I don't mean 13 or 14, which is scraping through. I do mean a good test pass, and I would hope for just 2 or 3 minor faults, and even a clean sheet. But what if the trainee started as a complete novice? Well, then the school's policy was to put them on a 5-day course. And I think that was about right. CBT would be day one. Then they'd get 3 full days of on-road training with the test on the 5th day. And again, we would have an excellent first-time pass rate on those courses. Now, you will find courses which offer shorter courses and still claim a good pass rate. Well, yes, they may have a good pass rate after the 2nd or 3rd test, but I really think that they will struggle to get people through on the first test. Now, oddly enough, when we shifted to doing direct access in 1997, it didn't actually turn out to be anything like as difficult as I'd expected. I really thought it would take riders a long time to adapt to the bigger machine, but in fact, it didn't. The big mistake, and one I still see made by some schools, was spending too much time on the 125, because then what the rider learnt to ride to a high standard was a 125. And what they then had to do was recalibrate those skills to deal with the much bigger machine. The brakes are more powerful, the bike takes off more quickly when you twist the throttle, the weight is completely different when you stop. There are any number of things that you have to worry about. The turning circles are bigger because the wheelbase is longer. It was actually quicker and more effective as a training technique to get them just good enough on the 125 that they could jump onto the direct access bike and keep it upright and then learn to ride the DAS bike. So, what is my own criterion for a test ready rider? Well, basically, it is someone who is reasonably competent, but the key point for me was always, could I take my eyes off that rider and look at the scenery for a moment or two without them getting into trouble? If I felt I could do that and I wasn't having to watch them every second of the ride, I felt they were ready for test and I felt that they would be a reasonably competent rider once they passed their test. But if I felt that I had to keep my eye on them absolutely every moment of the ride, then simply enough they weren't ready. But of course, the test pass is only the starting point. There's plenty more to learn. And on that note, before I rush away, I will leave you by telling you that the Science of Being Seen is available to watch once again. I'm running that first Wednesday in August. It's the 6th of April at 8 p.m. in the evening. Tickets are a fiver. It's the full presentation updated with the latest information. So if you haven't seen Science Being Seen, do come along watch it. I'm also organising some short mini bike rides, not for mini bikes, but mini rides as in mini distance. Few numbers and not too far. So if you're not a sort of a confident group rider, this is an ideal way to get going. You can find information on all these on the link which I'm just putting up on the comment stream. All right. I've overrun by miles this morning. I don't know what I was talking about. It must have been all those mousses. I got so interested in the mousse. I did a lot more research on it than I meant to do. Right, so that is it for today. Thank you very much for looking in again. If you are out there riding, take it easy out there. The forecast is looking good for the rest of the month, warming up nicely. So if you're interested in a riding course, do remember to drop me a line. I'm more than happy to give you some advice. And even if you're too far away for a practical course, there are, of course, my on-the-road coaching sessions. But that is it for today. Thank you once again for spending your time with the Elevenses. I'll be back on Wednesday with hopefully a slightly shorter show, one that doesn't go on quite as long.